Thank you, Bob. Just a quick question. Make sure that audio and video is working. Can you see my screen and hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Well, thanks again, Bob. As I said, my name is Leon Gorbaty. I'm Director of Product Management for Bentley Systems. I'm also the sort of inventor and original architect of this technology with the firm that I founded. We joined Bentley Systems towards the end of 2012. In fact, pre-Bentley we had a FIATech webinar, and some of this might be a little bit of a repeat because this whole idea really started with FIATech and a FIATech project. But things have moved on a little bit. We're also featuring an integration with Bentley's ProjectWise system. So I will introduce SpecWave Composer and talk about the wonderful world of codes, standards, and engineering specifications. A little bit about Bentley. You are probably familiar with us. We are a software company in AEC and other engineering verticals. The interesting fact is 85% of ENR's combined top 626 design firms are actually Bentley users. We enable some of the world's largest infrastructure projects, and if you're interested in learning more about Bentley systems, please visit us at www.bentley.com. So talking about code standards and engineering specifications, and unfortunately we will start with what happens when they go wrong. And the answer is a whole lot of really bad things, potentially. In fact, it is my understanding that in the unfortunate incident or accident or catastrophe when the design basis is being investigated, that engineering specifications supersede the drawings. A lot of people actually don't realize it. A lot of people think that you've submitted a drawing, you've signed off on the drawing, and that's the basis for design. Again, it is my understanding that if the spec says something different, that's what's supposed to govern. And in today's world, unfortunately, specs are done in a whole lot of different ways. There really isn't a standard approach. They're created with generic applications. There's a lot of time that goes into just word processing and formatting and cleaning up documents. Managing change is difficult. It is error prone. It is difficult to filter and aggregate for consumption. Specification documents in themselves, and especially entire libraries, can be very voluminous. Sometimes you have inherent contradictions. And overall, the world of code standards and specifications is tremendously inefficient today. One of the stories I frequently tell, which is a true one, I have a friend who is an inspector in the power industry. He confided in me one day. He said, you know, I don't read specs anymore. Anytime I'm scheduled for a major inspection, I get 1,000 pages of PDFs the night before that I'm supposed to verify compliance against, and it's just literally impossible. So I just don't even read them. I have 30 years of experience. I go in. If it looks right, I pass it. If it looks wrong, it fails. And I told this story once at a presentation to a group of lead engineers, and somebody brought their fist down the table and proclaimed that this is unacceptable. And so this is where the whole concept of SpecWave and a better approach to codes, standards, and engineering specifications. This is a dedicated toolkit for authoring, for managing, and for consuming in the field. So the solution is SpecWave Composer. We're also introducing a new term which is called Spec Modeling. I frequently like to say that this introduces engineering rigor to documents in a similar manner that CAD once did for engineering drawings. Now you can intelligently create specs, control, and ultimately comply with engineering specifications. So SpecWave Composer advantages: streamline specifying, concentrate spec compliance, and extend spec accuracy. Streamline specifying talks about intelligent creation and repurposing. We also call this multi-purposing, and I'll be talking about this a little bit more and also demonstrating it in the app itself. But this is about automatically conduct some key tasks instead of manually, obviously. Improve compliance, create once, reuse many times, excuse me, and better be able to maintain and enforce standards and allow people to focus on their core competencies. This really allows professional architects and engineers to be just that and not have to also be professional document editors. Extend spec accuracy. We are now completely integrated with Bentley ProjectWise. I will mention that SpecWave is essentially a standalone desktop application. It can be used in the absence of ProjectWise as well. In fact, our file format, which is called SpecX, I'll be talking about that more in a Fiat context towards the end of the presentation. But SpecX is really just a file on disk. You could use Documentum or FileNet or just a C drive. Of course, we feel that ProjectWise is the best engineering document management system out there. We do have an integration between SpecWave and ProjectWise, and this will ensure that all parties are on the same page, and now you can share your design files and also specifications in the same environment, in the same kind of way, and oh, by the way, connect and interlink documents and drawings. I'm going to do a little bit of demonstration. I'm going to discuss some of the key features of the product, and first and foremost is strict document quality and enforcement. SpecWave Composer locks down document style and structure, and it enforces the quality of the documents. It is now impossible to accidentally or inadvertently break documents, corrupt documents, lose the numbering, and so on. This substantially alleviates the burden of document formatting and focuses on ease of use for the subject matter expert. So with that, I'm going to switch to the SpecWave application. I'm going to give you a little bit of a general overview, and then talk about some of the specific features that we're working on. So SpecWave, for all intents and purposes, is a modern-day word processing application. It has to be. We export and import to other familiar word processing applications. We support graphics, embedded images, and so on. But the key difference is that everything is objectized and everything is explicitly held in structure. So when you look at the tree control or document map, the nested hierarchy of this is actually exactly the underlying XML representation of the document itself. This is quite different than Microsoft Word, for example. Furthermore, if we go to the text area, you can see that practically everything in the document is an object. One way to look at it is maybe as a hybrid of Microsoft Word or Microsoft Excel. You have the top-down narrative structure of a document, but everything is essentially a logical cell. And as a logical cell, it can have its own properties, attributes, and purposes. And here's where we get into the properties pane over towards the right side of the application. You can see that this set of properties are object-specific. As I switch to different objects, they will have different properties. Some of these general properties are actually delivered by the system. We call them the identification properties, such as when the object was created, by whom, when it was modified. This really works well for audit trail for these very important documents. The all-important object ID, which is unique and can be used to track the evolution of paragraphs and objects, and also for linking and interoperability with other applications. And then the rest of the stuff that you see I'll be introducing as part of this presentation, this is not delivered off the shelf. This is something that you or your organization can define for your documents and your environment. But again, generally speaking, this is a desktop application. It has an extremely easy install. There's practically no overhead to it. We have a very extensive help system so that the learning curve and the ability to get started with the product is actually very straightforward. So I'm going to talk a little bit about multi-purpose documents. So we also refer to this as persona-driven views. SpecWave Composer features the ability to reduce duplication of content by allowing infinite repurposing for different uses or user. Some real classic users would be to combine documents for design bid build versus design build in the construction world, or having a distinction between what's part of a core engineering standard or set of practices versus site-specific addenda. You can have multiple business units. For example, we frequently talk to organizations that say, you know, why do we have two different pump specs in our power group and our process plant group? Why can't we just combine our know-how for specifying and installing pumps? So this is exactly the kind of application. It also works for geographical variants, such as if you have some state-specific or locale-specific legalese in a document that are only applicable to a certain environment, or if you have certain variants for Europe versus North America, or tropicalization versus winterization. So now you don't have to do a save as and slightly modified document. You can work right on the same master document, and that really gives you a lot of efficiency in terms of maintenance, and also the reduction of proofreading and editing on projects. So I will demonstrate this in the application. You'll see that this precast structural concrete document was actually via template definition was defined to support multi-purposing for business group, for language. Here we have English and Spanish side by side, for a certain version of CSI master format, and certain projects. And before I show you this, I'm going to show you just a little bit about templates. So here's a specific user template, and we tell you that the file that you're editing is a template, not a final document. So in templates, you'll go into style definitions, and here's where this organization defined every kind of object that is legal in the document. They defined a numbered structure hierarchy, as well as anything else that can appear in the document, and that's it. That's all that you can do. It is possible to change it, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. But one thing I want to point out here is that if you are somebody that is familiar with style definitions in Microsoft Word, this should be fairly straightforward. Typically, you'd get started by picking your favorite template, for lack of a better word, or typical document, and essentially creating the character font definitions, the paragraph numbering and indentation, and you can essentially get documents in SpecWave to look exactly like you want them in Microsoft Word, but without the ability to introduce any corruption, double indentation, or misnumbering, or anything along those lines. Here's another example of a template that I called a basic plant template. This provides some seed structure if this template is used for new documents, and when you go into the style definitions of that, it uses a different methodology than the previous user template, which was essentially a CSI compliant template. So you can create these templates as you need to. You can have master templates and project templates. You can have corporate templates and contractor templates, and so on. So back to one thing I'll mention there is when you go to a document, and if you do a file export, we can export to PDF. We can export to Microsoft Word. When we export to Word, you get the document looking exactly the way that you expect, although the numbering is dynamic, and so on. And you can also export to another SpecX file. Why would you want to do that, you might ask? There's a couple of reasons for that. One is when I show you the multi-purposing in just a minute, you can export only a certain purpose, where all of the other purposes will be physically stripped out. As I mentioned before, this is an open interoperable standard, so anybody with WinZip and Notepad can essentially get into the underlying mechanics. So if you wanted to strip out the stuff that's out of context, you can. But also, if you wanted to do a template transformation, so as I mentioned, we really separate content from presentation. And SpecWave has a great ability to completely transform a document to a different style and structure. You're not locked in concrete, so pun intended. It just requires an extra manual step. So if you wanted to go from part 1 to 1.0 or to ABC or whatever, you could just create a different template, and you do an export to a SpecX file via template transformation, and the document or multiple documents are transformed seamlessly. This is actually a unique SpecWave advantage. So with that, back to the multi-purposing demonstration. This document was decorated for several multi-purposes, and at the end of the day, it simply boils down to setting the active view filter control. So we will say that now we're going to go to a specific purpose or context or project, and this is going to be our transportation business group. This project is being done in American English. We are using the 2004 version of master format. This is going to be a design bid build project. We're going to hide all notes to specifier, and this document was actually multi-purposed for both imperial and metric units. We'll say that we'll select the imperial option, and the first thing that we will show you is everything that is logically excluded for the current purpose, and if you turn off show exclusions, then the document will completely renumber, restructure, and is now ready to, you can export it as a PDF, as a frozen deliverable for a certain purpose at this time. So at the end of the day, multipurposing is actually quite simple, but it's very powerful because it reduces a lot of editing and proofreading and allows you to reduce duplication of content. So again, very powerful feature. And the way that you define it, I'm going to quickly jump into the template definition again, is you have to go into the tag definitions, and your organization defines how you want the multipurpose documents. You can give it the business script that you have, the languages that you want to support, the project types that you want to do, and so on. So once you've defined the template, then all documents that are based on that template can be easily multipurposed simply via a touch of the mouse. So that's multipurposing in a nutshell. The next thing I'm going to talk about is spec-driven process. So we recognize that specifications are by definition meant to be exchanged among different organizations, and they're also, as the core, most critical documents on any project, they're always riding along with various processes and business activities such as procurement, inspection, and so on. In the past, there's been various documents and schedules such as a vendor data information requirement or an inspection and test plan and ITP that are developed via spreadsheet or an addendum, a separate document. There's copy and paste involved, which means that if the main document changes, you tend to have some dysynchronization there. So we've come up with the ability to leverage the template definition and the tagging to enable some of these spec-related processes, and we've provided direct support for some of these areas that I've listed here. So to show you how this works in practice, I'm going to go into an actual very large specification that's that's used for design of a chip handling system, and I'm going to go into the active view of the workflow of inspection schedule, for example. And here is essentially an ITP that lists out what needs to be inspected, what the witness, who has to witness it, what's the milestone, and so on. The point here being is that this is just a view. This is not a separate document. It was not created via copy. And when I actually select an object in here and I switch back to the master document, here is that object, that cell that provided the entry into the inspection and test plan. The really powerful thing about this is, again, I mean, the obvious point of lack of dysynchronization. If the spec changes, so does the ITP immediately. But the engineer, when he or she has the content and context of this paragraph in mind, they can just simply touch it and be communicating with the inspector, be communicating with the procurement department right there on the object itself. And if the object is out of context due to multipurposing, then its entry disappears from the subsequent schedule or list. So you don't have stale entries sitting around, something that typically happens when you start with a sample from a previous project and then begin to edit it for this project. It really provides you with a toolkit to do a lot more with the document than just write it. So in a nutshell, that's the concept of spec-driven process, and we support that for ITPs, submittals, and vendor data requirements, also for iterating comments, exceptions, and clarifications to specifications to vendors, suppliers, subcontractors, and so on, and overlays and exception specs, which are used in the process industry. Talk a little bit about revision management. In SpecWave Composer, we support the familiar excuse me, concept of change tracking, but we also go above and beyond that to allow multiple snapshots of the document at any state for any reason, and that would typically be 30% complete, 60% complete, or pending discipline lead review, or FEL1, FEL2, FEL3, and so on. The nice thing about the way that we implemented it is that the snapshots are actually stored in the SpecX file itself, so that there aren't multiple files of disk. You can actually essentially just work with the document at hand, and we provide some really nice tools for being able to evaluate these differences. So I will go back to the precast structural concrete spec, go into review, manage revision. You can see you've got your typical track changes options as well. But all that track changes does is it introduces a concept of a session, at the end of which it'll take a snapshot of a revision. So here are the revisions that I created for demonstration purposes in this document. I named one arbitrarily first milestone. I will select that, and I will compare the first milestone to second milestone. And what we call the spec diff, which stands for specification differencing window, will come up, and you can see here on the left you have the first milestone, you have the second milestone, and this document basically had one paragraph deleted, and then downstream of that the paragraphs renumbered. So you can take snapshots of document for audit trail and just for just being able to see who changed what and when and how. And we also support multi-file compare. So as long as you have a couple of directories or data sources, they have equally named files, you can use multi-file compare, where we will actually find all the files that are different and show you the differences in the spec diff window. And this can be very powerful to comparing an entire project set of specifications back to the master to see how the project has changed. So you can bring some lessons learned back into the master, for example, or if you subscribe to industry content such as master spec or something like that, and you maintain a set of in-house specifications, then you can use the multi-file compare feature to see what's changed in successive publishings and be able to update your master specifications that much easier and quicker. So again, another SpecWave advantage in terms of the named snapshots and revision management. So I'm going to talk a little bit about mass load and advanced search. I mentioned that excuse me, that we separate content from presentation, and this really leads to a very robust environment where we can open hundreds and even thousands of files all at once. I'll be pointing out the little case study towards the end of the presentation, but the point here is that you can really work with a lot of documents. You can work with an entire library all at the same time. So here I actually have one tab here that is that has about 30 documents open all at once. This is the same. We could have opened these documents in individual tabs, but that would really require a lot of graphics, so we do this as part of, when you go to open, you can open in single file mode, or you can open in multiple files, where you can even grab an entire directory or recursively an entire directory tree. And once you're working in a multi-document environment, what really comes into play is the advanced search. In search, you can search by text as you traditionally would, but you can also search by any of the tags that were used for multi-purposing or spec-driven process. So if you want to find everything that was related to welding, or everything that was, you want to find all of your inspection requirements across multiple documents, you can really do that here. I'll quickly demonstrate. I'll put in something like ASME capital, and here I found 21 hits on ASME. You can see that they're coming from 3 different documents. If I select one of the results in here, then that object will be automatically selected in the text area in the background, but the search interface itself, it's kind of spreadsheet-like, so you can open up multiple columns, so you can group and sort based on certain criteria. You can also even, you can't edit the body text, but you can still edit all of the attributes for any object. You can also do that for multiple object selection all at once. So it's a very powerful toolkit for the person that's responsible for a spec library in terms of being able to work with a large amount of data, be able to find the proverbial needle in the haystack, or do what you need to do across multiple documents and entire libraries all at once. So that talks about mass load and advanced search. Now I'm going to talk about the SpecWave ProjectWise integration. So ProjectWise is a document management system. It is optimized for engineering organizations. Most of the large E&R firms use ProjectWise. And SpecWave, when you install SpecWave, you have the option to install the ProjectWise integration, which will give you bidirectional attribute exchange, and you can do things such as multipurpose based on information that's coming from ProjectWise, and support certain approval workflows and publishing, such as iterating documents through subject matter experts, and so on. And this also comes into play through the tag definition. So I'll go to this user template again and go into the tag definitions. And here, instead of selecting all objects within a file, which we did for multipurposing, we will select the file object itself, and that has a certain set of properties listed. You can see that properties can be choices, they can be strings, they can be numbers. But in this case, these attributes are applicable to the document at the file level, and they're also the same attributes that are used by this organization in a ProjectWise environment. And as part of the integration, you're able to do an update either from SpecWave to ProjectWise or from ProjectWise down to SpecWave. So again, we think that for organizations that already use ProjectWise, we've seen some organizations that keep their engineering drawings in ProjectWise, but they keep specs in some other systems. So the story here is really why have two different systems. You can now keep your engineering specifications and drawings in the same system, and it works very well. So the benefits are reduced risk, reduced time spent, and improved quality. Some key value propositions that we're offering for some of the most important critical documents on any project. Talk a little bit of a case study. And a gentleman from CDM Smith who used SpecWave to completely reformat and transform a spec library of about 990 documents, so that's 1,000 documents, and this particular individual was actually able to work with the entire library on a fairly outdated Windows NT laptop, 32-bit, a few years old. He was able to open up 1,000 files, and everything worked in a very performantly. So, and you can see the comments that have come back from the users. So it's really quite, if you've got a complicated spec or structured document task, SpecWave can really do a lot of automation and provide a tremendous amount of value. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the SpecX file format. So at the end of the day, I mentioned the SpecWave is just a desktop application. Our persistence or our saving mechanism is just a file on disk. It's just like a PDF or a docx file. In fact, it's very much like a docx file. It is compliant to open packaging conventions, which is an open standard that was originally introduced by Microsoft. But it is optimized for engineering specifications in terms of the spec modeling that we do. This started out in Fiatech, and this was always about non-proprietary, open interoperability suggestion for engineering specifications. Since the Bentley acquisition, we are completely committed to maintaining that. In fact, we are currently trying to get going a new Fiatech project, which we're calling Spec Modeling Collaboration, or the acronym SMC, and we are currently looking for participation. So if you're interested, here's a list of the various key points of leadership that you can contact, and we'd be very much happy to have you in this project. We're going to be further developing the schemas that are part of the SpecX file format, hopefully introducing some common meta language so that an inspection requirement is an inspection requirement in different areas and different industries in the same way, and so on. Really moving towards true interoperability and harmonization for these most important documents in the capital facilities industry. So with that, that's my presentation. I was shooting for about 30 minutes. Looks like I'm right on. And I'll open it up for questions at this time. Rob, thank you very much.
Thank you, Leon. Do we have any questions out there? I have not seen any typed in. You can type those in at this time. We do have, and Leon, we now have the poll system working. We do have a series of questions for you all that, in lieu of a question coming in, that we'd like to try an experiment. We have opened the ability to do polling of all of our attendees, and we have about 52 of you out there at this stage. So I'm going to launch, while some of you think about whether or not you have any questions for Leon, I'm going to try and launch the first of these questions, and we'll see how they work automatically. So you should be seeing that this is our poll, and you can click on online, and we'll be giving you the immediate calculations of the answers as you come in. Of course, the organizers and panelists are not going to vote. But the first one is, do you see the need for spec interoperability with design tools and other project workflows? And then just select one of these in which you see the answer. Of course, you can select all three, all of the above. So if you will go ahead and begin to fill that out, that would be great. And we'll then close that answer. And I now have, well, we'll leave this open for a few more of you to vote. I've got half of you voted. And as you know, we're recording this. All of this will be up on the Theotech website shortly. And you'll be able to see the answers to these polling questions as well. I'm going to leave this open for a couple more minutes. We're up to 65% of those on the call voting. A couple more. And you should be seeing the poll in progress. A few more coming in. 3/4 of you. Okay, that seems to be about as many of you are going to respond. We have one more coming in. With about 80% of you in, 17% are saying CAD programs. None are saying procurement systems. 14% have said construction and commissioning. And 69% have said all of the above. So thank you. And we'll go to the next poll. And let's go to the next poll question while people are now there's the summary of the voting with 82% coming in. And let's see if I can get the next poll to work. And let's see if we have any questions coming in in the meantime. Leon, do you have any comments on the poll?
I can't see it. That I haven't figured out how to see it. I think I'm still screen sharing here.
Okay, you should be seeing. We should be seeing your. I'm seeing your screen.
Yeah, I should stop sharing. Screen sharing.
It's up at the top.
Okay, now I can see you. Yeah, I can see the viewer now.
Okay. But you should be seeing the screen with the results.
Yeah, I just see the first question still.
Okay. Well, let's go to the see if there are any questions. And I'm going to give you control back, Liam, while I do the questions here, because it may someone may want to see some part of your presentation as we handle the questions.
You're going to have to make me presenter again.
You should be seeing your screen. I did shift you over, Leon.
Okay, it hasn't updated yet.
In the interim, you may be seeing the summary, but let me read the questions as I have them here, because we do have some questions that have come in the interim. Does SpecWave expose objects and attributes to link with BIM process and plant modeling?
Yes, we're actually working on that right now as part of our technology roadmap for SpecWave under Bentley. We are planning to connect specs with building information models in a bidirectional way so you can generate specs from models and vice versa. We've had several proof of concepts that have been pretty well accepted. So right now we do not deliver anything that specifically integrates with our tools or other tools, but that's very much on our short-term technology roadmap, is to integrate with Bentley Ecosystem Building Designer and various other design tools. Okay.
Another question. Do you also deal with design standards such as AEC, ASCE, AISC, and ACI standards?
It's quite a complicated question. Most industry standards, they're copyrighted. They're published as PDFs, and
right.
You're not supposed to transform. The real value proposition is if you can purchase standards already modeled, so that welding, inspection, commissioning, those kinds of things are already in a SpecX document. And we are actually talking to several standards organizations about publishing in SpecX. So we do work from it in that respect, but again, when you buy a frozen deliverable document that has copyright restrictions on it, there's certain sets of limitations, so you have to be careful.
Okay. And we have another question here. Is there a limit to the number of multi-purpose selections that can be put in a template?
There is not. I would caution somebody against creating multi-purpose spaghetti. You probably want to pick a good set that you get value from and not have to touch each and every object. But that being said, no, there is no limit. You can define that via template as you need to.
And does SpecWave have any direct integration with BIM modeling tools yet? I mean, you kind of addressed that.
Yeah, I think I answered
that. Seems like spec-driven process filtering of the document is almost unfair when communicated specs with other consultants contractors. Is there a plan for this to be implemented for the consumers of a spec document? Example, in a packaged application for viewing or in a PDF?
Yeah, we are currently working on enabling specifications in mobile devices, where you'll be able to get just the context, kind of going back to the story of the inspector, being able to get just what you need as a consumer on a mobile device or if you have a laptop and have access to a desktop application, then it could be that much richer. So we do, and we also do plan a lightweight version of SpecWave under Bentley's upcoming Cloud Connect services, where the concepts of redlining, comments, and exceptions and clarifications are going to be enabled for users who are downstream in a workflow, such as a subcontractor or a third-party inspection agency, and so on. So
okay. Okay. Does the system automatically generate a submittals register or a list of submittals required by the construction contractor in accordance with the specs?
Not purely automatically. You have to do the tagging. Now, we do have very vast migration or data import capabilities where there's a lot of things that you can do, such as recognize a certain section. So, for example, if you have a section that's called submittals and you want everything underneath it at one level of indentation to be automatically tagged as a submittal requirement, and that will give you a reasonably good automated submittal schedule. Yeah, there's a lot of tools there, but in order to really enable the spec-driven process, unfortunately, there is a subject matter expert requirement of somebody has to read the paragraph, create objects, and tag them. So there's some degree of automation, but in reality, in practice, it's a semi-automated, semi-manual process that does require subject matter expertise. So typically, a certain discipline lead or the person that's responsible will actually do the tagging, but the real advantage is that multiple users or multiple projects don't have to do that process again and again and again. So it's a little bit of an investment up front, and then you can reap the benefit of that multiple times as the document gets used and reused.
Okay. Another question is, how do you see yourself competing with other document management systems?
Well, that's a ProjectWise question. SpecWave is not a document management system. SpecWave is essentially an object-oriented editor. So, you know, we sort of compete with Word to a certain extent. But how does ProjectWise compete with other document management system? I think we blow them out of the water.
Okay. And let's see if we have one more. Also, is collaboration on specs the same way as ProjectWise, or is this done manually by sending the files and not synced to the network?
That's up to you. Like I mentioned, you know, SpecX is essentially a file on disk. So we do respect, for organizations that use network shares, we do respect the Windows permission system, so that if a certain document belongs to the mechanical department, that only a colleague in the mechanical department can edit it, and it's read-only to everybody else. We certainly enforce that. That's why we recommend the use of a document management system such as ProjectWise, because you got the concept of lock, unlock, and so on. But if you leave two SpecX files, if you have a SpecX file and multiple people have read-write access to it, whoever hits save last wins. So it's an advantage, it's a disadvantage. At the end of the day, it's a file on disk, for better or for worse. Okay.
What specific disciplines are covered in a SpecWave Composer? Building, underground construction, etc.
It's a completely industry-independent product. It's really, spec modeling is about defining structure and defining tags and workflows. We don't really have any support for any particular industry or flavor. That being said, it's sort of the next step. So if you define templates that are specific to AEC, which would typically be CSI master format compliant, then that's a specialization that SpecWave supports very well. It's kind of like what I did with the templates, when I showed you one template that was CSI compliant and another basic plant template that has a different structure. So you can actually leverage templates for creating constraints on top of what SpecWave can do, and you can make those industry and discipline specific.
Okay. Are there aspects of traditional specs that you believe might not be useful for BIM tools when finally the integration between specs and BIM models is achieved?
Aspects of traditional specs that I'm not sure I'm understanding the question.
Let me read it again. Are there aspects of traditional specs that you believe might not be useful for BIM tools when finally the integration between specs and BIM models is achieved?
Again, I still don't quite understand the question, but if I'm thinking of aspects of traditional specs and we think of things that might be in there like tables and graphics and other things, the text, which might not be useful in the model. So when we do go to connect specs with design tools, we'll have to really decide as far as how much the document comes across. But once you have the link, and if you have a certain requirement in the BIM model, and then you can follow the link back to SpecWave and back to the document, and then you can see the rest of the narrative, you can see the notes to specify, you can see details or graphics, whatever else. So those would probably stay in the document while some text is exposed in the BIM model.
Okay.
That was my interpretation of the question. I'm not sure.
Okay. And again, those of you, if we're not answering your question, you can write back into us, and Leon and I will get back to you. And for those of you who may not get to your questions before our hour is up, we will do the same. Another question: has SpecWave Composer been? Let's see. Has SpecWave Composer been approved or accepted by FDOT or any other DOT? So by the Department of Transportation. And the answer to that at this time is no. Okay.
So it's also my experience that specific to the DOTs, it seems like the point of authorship is typically with the contractors and not the state agencies themselves. So I don't know how much value there would be to that, but that's subjective.
Okay. This person writes, I may have missed it. Could you explain how the system processing data in tables, or how it processes data in tables?
We support tables. When you import from Microsoft Word, the tables do come across as tables. You can also multi-purpose within tables. You can multi-purpose rows and individual cells. So if you have a table and you go to the purpose of North America, then the European specific lines will disappear. So we do support tables fully and completely, and you can also use tagging and multi-purposing, the spec-driven process within the tables.
Okay. Can you import CSI specs into SpecWave Composer automatically?
Yes, and we do that extremely well because it's a really nice thing in the AEC industry that CSI exists. We've seen specs with all, formatting and structure all over the place. The fact that master format is out there provides something that's very predictable and expected, and our migration or import mechanism can recognize that stuff very well. So the answer there, especially for CSI, is very much of a yes.
Okay. And Leon, I've tried to give control back to you, so you might see if it's come in. We have just a few more minutes left here. There we go. I have one more poll that I will try and see. And I guess doesn't work that way. Okay. Let me just see if there's any more. I think I just saw one more question come in. So. Okay, we have no additional questions. So at this time, we want to thank you all for joining us today. And I want to thank Leon in particular for putting this presentation together. And as I said, we will be putting this entire thing up as a recording on the FIATech website. And we hope that you'll be able to join us again for another Technology Tuesday webinar. Leon, do you have any final closing comments?
I'd like to thank everybody for joining, and thank you, Bob, for putting this together.
Okay. Thank you all again.